to a new episode of the Fortress of Filitude. In today's episode, I'm going to do a crafting project for some daises, platforms, pedestals, whatever you'd like to call them. I originally had this idea for a piece of scatter terrain that I wanted to do a video on that I'll probably do sometime here in the near future. But as I was developing that project in my mind, I realized I needed a base of some sort to put this type of scatter terrain on, as well as other pieces of scatter terrain. So that project blossomed into this. So here we have the 5 different types that I've built. On the far left there, we've got sort of the ancient, eldritch, unsophisticated stonework. In the center, you've got sort of this standard dungeon style. On the far right, you've got kind of what I consider dwarven type terrain, although it could be steampunk, or it could be just a mechanical dungeon feature. And then in the front there, I have a couple of simpler platforms. Of course, the one on the lower left, obviously something more you'd find in nature, maybe druids or elves. And then on the right, at the bottom, one that's built up, it's a little more sophisticated, could be found outside, could still be found in a dungeon. It's got some runes on the surface. And the idea here is, when I make scatter terrain, I want to try and make different styles to reflect different cultures, so that all my scatter terrain doesn't necessarily look alike, but over time I'll have types of scatter terrain that are sort of grouped together to reflect certain cultures, certain kingdoms within my own home campaign setting. I'll talk about that a little bit more as I show you how I made these. So let's go to the crafting table and we'll get started. So I started with some basic paper templates, especially for the more unusual shapes. I actually made templates for circles, and I don't know why, because I could just use a compass to make circles when I need to. But I actually went so far as to do all those and print them out before I, thought about it differently. So I just traced these paper templates out onto some chipboard. This is your basic chipboard that everybody uses for their terrain making. And, this doesn't have to be perfect. You're just trying to get the basic outline. And I went through and did different sizes, different shapes. Knowing I wasn't going to use all of them for this project, but I will eventually use them for something. So I thought, while I'm doing this, I might as well draw out and cut out as many as I can while I'm thinking about it. And, of course, that scraggly gray hair showing up there in the camera frame. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. It's definitely past time for a haircut. Yeah, I'm just using the Sharpie to just go around the outlines. I can sharpen up those lines later if I want to, or, I'm really going to sharpen it up as I cut these out. And the cogs, I'm not real sure why I cut out the middles of those. I won't always have the middle cut out. And, no need for that level of complexity on cutting out the templates, because I'm going to transfer these to foam, and whatever I want to cut out on the foam, I can cut on it. I didn't really have to do that on the templates. Luckily, I figured that out before I cut them all out from the chipboard. Now, these circles, I did actually use a compass. I didn't use, paper templates for the circles. Yeah, so you just go through with the shears and just kind of fix some of those edges, make them a little straighter, corners a little sharper. And the cogs. These weren't as difficult to cut out as I thought they would be. I did use a little bit of the hobby knife to do the diagonal cuts in between the various cogs on those gears. But, they weren't hard, didn't take long. So I just kind of got all my little templates together of all the ones that I had cut out for now. Like I said, I wouldn't be using all of them. And I just transferred those on top of some pink foam, XPS foam, and cut them out on the Proxxon. I think I had a setting of about 2, maybe a little over 2, because I am using 2-inch thick XPS here. Yeah, it worked out pretty well. I did go through and make a couple extra little cuts just to smooth out some of the edges. to make sure the corners were as sharp as I wanted them to be. You can always take a little bit of sandpaper too and sand on the edges of those if you felt like it. But if you do, please wear a mask or do it outside because it will create a lot of dust. And the same thing on the little gear wheels. And I'm just using dollar store foam core with the paper peeled off both sides. It was about the thickness that I wanted. And see, it turns out pretty well. A couple of different little sizes, a couple of little differences in the overall shapes, just so I'd have some variety on the gears I want to put in that dwarven pedestal. Oh, and there's nothing more satisfying than using a hot wire cutter to just melt and scoop out all that foam. And this is the octagonal base. I figured this would be my dwarven themed pedestal. I'm going to put the gears in. That scoop attachment came in real handy for taking out these big chunks out of the center. Then I used another piece of dollar store foam core with the paper still on to kind of wedge in there at about the depth that I wanted. I also used that hot wire cutter on the cogs. Kind of scoop out the extra spots on those. Hexagon base. I just drew in some simple textures on the top to make it look like some triangular stone slabs. And for this one, for my home campaign, I want this pedestal to be done in a style that's reminiscent of some really ancient draconic kingdoms, built by lizard folk and kobolds and other reptilian creatures that worship these dragon overlords. Put some cracks in the top. Once I have that done, I take some good old aluminum foil and texture the top of it. You notice I don't do the sides because I had something else in mind for the sides on this one. I sort of reflect its more primitive nature and how ancient it was. I cut out some different sizes of XPS foam. Just different rectangles and squares, different thicknesses, different sizes, and use some tacky glue to glue those to the sides. In sort of an irregular, mix-matched pattern. That had a nice effect and kind of reflected what I was going for with this particular culture. Other types of scatter terrain that I'll do later on, I'm going to do kind of the same sort of thing for anything that's of the same sort of time period, this ancient dragon empire. Then for two of the pedestals, this is the one for sort of the outdoors, nature-themed. I just used dollar store foam core, took the paper off both sides, just carving in some basic symbols on this top layer. Solar symbol in the middle, some different symbols around the edges to represent phases of the moon, some different runes, and then textured it with a good old aluminum foil ball. That one's going to be more indicative of an elven culture or something maybe for fae or druids. This one too is going to be simple. I did use XPS foam. I think this was 1/2-inch foam. Just different circles and then little half circles or semicircles there for the steps. I use a texture roller to put a texture in the top of it here. Now these are usually made for clay or putty, but they do work on XPS foam. If you press them hard enough, it actually works better than you'd think. And this is just sort of the pedestal for just the standard dungeon, not reflective of any particular culture or time period. Hand carved the steps there without a template. Wasn't too difficult to do. You see I'm going through here making the brick pattern. After I've got the basic shapes in, I go back over it and kind of round the corners on those bricks. It has a nice effect to it. Some cracks in the steps. And then of course do the same thing to the top of it. Now, I'm not worried about the grid on this. I made it a little bit smaller than 3 inches, so it doesn't fit a perfect grid. So I'm just drawing in a random sort of tile pattern on the top. I wanted this to be able to fit into a 3x3 area on a grid or a battle mat without taking up the entire grid. Because it's just basically a 15-foot radius, or I'm sorry, a 15-foot diameter circle, I wasn't too worried about it fitting a grid perfectly. I wanted to make sure it would fit into whatever area I tried to stick it. So you just continued the lines for some of those stone slabs on the top to the sides. And of course, added the brick pattern all the way around. Now for the dwarven pedestal with the gears. You see I made some basic stone steps to kind of go with that. I did the same thing for the draconic pedestal. I just made it out of individual XPS foam bricks and kind of glued them together haphazardly to kind of go along with the rest of the theme of that irregular stonework. And then of course it's time for the black paint and Mod Podge to protect all this stuff. Just painted everything. I actually ended up doing 2 coats on everything just to make sure I had good coverage and make sure I had a good base coat of black paint to use as a primer. Those cheap paint brushes are really good for this sort of thing. Even though I'm using the black as sort of the base coat for all of these, I am going to paint them all different colors, as you've seen from the beginning of the video. This one I went with a sort of a green color. And with the dwarven one, I ended up putting some more browns in it, so that each of these sort of has a different color scheme. They don't all look identical. The color schemes are just kind of part of what differentiates them one another in terms of culture. Here's the 2 more basic pedestals. For the elven or druidic themed pedestal, I went with a very light gray. I wanted this one to be a light colored stone. I wasn't going to put a lot of variation on it. I didn't want to put any browns or greens or anything on it. I wanted it to be kind of, I don't know, it looked kind of like stone that had been worn down and maybe even polished intentionally. To be clean, sort of a uniform, reflective color. You know, maybe it reflects the moonlight. As always worried about how much the paint is going to cover up some of the detail I've carved into the top of it, but it's always kind of a needless worry. Usually when that paint dries, everything still shows through pretty good. The hard part's just sort of highlighting it without messing up your paint job or making it look really funky. Same base color on this group of pedestals. This one's kind of meant to look like it's maybe carved out of one block of stone or several just big slabs rather than individual bricks or tiles. And see, for this one, back for the nature themed one, I kind of went in with a very light blue wash and sort of highlighted those runes. And it worked out. It's not maybe not the same shade of blue that I expected once it dried. It maybe looks a little darker, but the effect is there. I think it would have looked a lot different if I'd used a brown or a black. And I used a dark wash across the whole thing on this other pedestal. Really made all the runes on the top there kind of pop and stand out better. And then I just dry brushed a very light gray, and then I think even went back over it with another dry brush of a white, specifically to hit the edges. It's a very subtle effect. It's probably hard to see on the screen. Even in person, you know, up close, it's not real obvious. But that's the way I wanted it to look. This one also used a light gray, and then I think I actually used a pure white to go back and sort of dry brush the edges there, just to kind of do an edge highlight, especially on the steps to kind of make them look a little more worn, kind of sell the effect that people are walking up and down in that area. The Draconic pedestal, the steps, you can't really tell from here, but I used, like I said, a darker green paint over top of the black. It's got a nice effect. You know, it looks like a really old, maybe it's covered in moss, maybe it's mildew, or maybe it's just the type of stone that was used. Just weird green color. Using the light gray to highlight it. Same thing. You can see the green there. I realize, you know, I'm using this as a type of terrain that would be from an ancient dragon empire, but this would also work really well for a game that's, you know, using elements of Lovecraft, you know, aberrations and things that should not be, you know, some kind of weird eldritch construction. You put some kind of weird statue or altar on top of there, or a group of cultists. Went through and highlighted this with the light gray, and darkened it all with a black wash later on, which kind of dulled down some of that gray. I'm going to spray this one with a gloss varnish, gloss sealer, just to make it look like it's really shiny, maybe even a little wet. Now for the Dwarven pedestal. I've also got this little pack of steampunk gears and wheels, all kinds of different sizes, a couple of different colors. Really wanted to put a lot of these inside of it, just to sell the effect that there's some kind of mechanical apparatus inside of there. You know, maybe whatever you put up on the pedestal is a lever that activates something else in the dungeon, or it just, you know, whatever you set up there just rotates and moves because of the gears inside. I was really hoping these would show up better once I had that top gear on there as the main section of the platform, but I couldn't really carve it any thinner or any additional details or make those slots any wider without it being too flimsy. As it is now, it holds the weight of other miniatures and other pieces of scatter terrain pretty well. These gears that are on the inside, you really got to be up close to kind of see them, but it's kind of a neat effect. If you get up there close and you kind of look down in there, you can see that there are the other gears down in there. Hopefully my players will get a kick out of that the first time I use it. There it is with everything glued in there. You can kind of see looking through. There's definitely something in there. And next time I'll use the granny grating for something else. I was originally going to put it on top. A little too flimsy, and I like the way it looked just with the gear wheel on top. And here's the basic pedestal, just a standard gray over top of the black. Spent some time here painting it off screen because I wasn't paying attention to where the camera was. You can see a little bit, yeah, he's brushing something on there. Okay, yeah, there we go. That's better. So just a basic gray on here. It's how I do a lot of my dungeon stone. Black, and then a good strong overbrush of this sort of dark gray. And really, it's not important what specific colors you use. I'm not always going to say what color they are because I don't always remember. And, you know, do your own thing. Come up with your own color schemes. You don't have to worry about the specific shade that I used. Use what you want to use. Same base coat of this gray on the dwarven platform. I guess really I should call these daises, but for some reason that's not a word people use very often. So for now they're kind of the same color, but now we gotta go ahead and put in the fine details. Well, I say fine details, but extra details. I'm doing a couple of lighter colors, different color gray and some of the stonework on this one just to give it some variety. To make it look like it is made of different stones here and there. And then use this darker kind of blue-gray color. Every time I use this, when I first put it on, I'm afraid it's a little too blue, that it's going to look funny, that it's not going to blend right. But once it dries, and once you put a wash on it, and once you get a dry brush on there, it blends in with everything else. I kind of like using the blue rather than the browns sometimes. Now, some people are hung up on realism, but it's a fantasy world. I'm not too worried about mimicking real-world stone too much. These slabs on the top, do those blue as well. And a really light gray. It's almost an off-white. You could get really detailed here. I mean, you could use a lot of different colors. You could put some browns in. You could mix in some greens, some sort of dark reddish browns. There's no wrong way to do this, it's just kind of what you want. Whatever your style is. So I did use browns on this one, since this is going to be sort of dwarven terrain. I say sort of, it won't always necessarily be something that's built by dwarves, maybe something built by someone who just has some mechanical expertise. But anyways, I wanted it to look a little different, so I used a brown on some of these blocks. That's just I think that's a raw umber. Maybe it's a burnt umber. It's umber. And then I think I even used a lighter, like a burnt sienna. A little bit lighter color brown, like a little more red in it. The other color. Didn't really go too crazy with putting a lot of browns on here. Just a few here and there. So then I stippled on some brown across the whole thing. Just created a sort of a subtle effect. It kind of gives the whole thing a little bit of what you would expect, a brown tinge. Fades into the gray pretty well. These little stone stairs, I mean, I can use those with other scatter terrain too. I don't always have to just use them with this pedestal. So I thought about hot gluing them on the way I did the stairs on the cylindrical pedestal. But I also thought about putting magnets in them, but then I thought, nah, I don't need to go that far. Shaky camera there. There I go, just dry brushing some more of that brown, sort of a medium brown color. Once I got all that on, I went through with an even lighter brown. I think it's a cinnamon brown color. Some people have shades like honey brown, and caught the edges just to do an edge highlight around the top edge of the surfaces there and the corners. Put the wash on. Homemade black wash. Definitely don't want to use the expensive stuff on big pieces of terrain. Same thing on this one. Even though I was using brown colors, I still used the black wash and spread it across the top gear up there. Darkened it a little bit, but didn't leave the effect that I kind of wanted, so I came back later with some oil-stained paint from Vallejo, I guess that's the proper way to say their names since they're from Spain. Dabbed some of that around. Once it dries, it does have a nice oily look to it. Here's where I went back and just started doing some of the dry brushing. Lighter gray across all of this. Helps bring out some more of the little details. Blend in some of the color. And then I used a lighter gray to do sort of an edge highlight on it. But yeah, here I am doing that real light brown dry brush. It's hard to see in the sped up video. You can maybe see it a little bit there. And that was it. So here's the final results. You can see that one's pretty uniform in color. My elven themed or nature themed pedestal. But like I said, I wanted that one to look like it's some kind of reflective stone. Something that's going to be outdoors. And then the sort of arcane glyph pedestal. That one's just basic stonework, black wash. Probably going to seal that one with a matte varnish. I haven't sealed any of these yet because the weather has been terrible, and I don't want to spray any of that inside the house. The draconic pedestal. From the lighting there, it looks a little more gray than it really is in person. The green really does show up more face to face. Like I said, I'm gonna coat this one with a gloss, so it's a little shiny. Dwarven pedestal, the mechanical pedestal. It's got the gears on the inside. I think you can really tell the browns here. The light's maybe a little too bright, like I said, but I think you can see the result there with the general brown color. Maybe someday I'll make a version that actually has movable gears on the inside. And then the basic dungeon stone. The one that's a sort of generic I can use for any time period or culture. So there you have it. Pretty easy project. If you liked the video, please hit like. Be sure to subscribe. Tell your friends and neighbors. And hey, if you didn't like the video, feel free to dislike, leave a comment. And we'll see you next time at the Fortress of Philitude.